Hello, this is Rudy Giuliani back again with another episode of Rudy's Common Sense. Today we're going to take a look at the influence of communism on the things that are happening in America that have us all saying, we can't believe this is happening in America. How often have you or one of your friends said, I can't believe this is happening in America? Whether it's the teaching of alternative genders to 5-year-olds, or it's the mandates that you must take an experimental vaccine that turns out not to be a vaccine because it doesn't really give you immunity. And if you don't, you are fired from your job, even if you're a hero public worker, or the deterioration, massive destruction of our criminal justice system, paid for by George Soros all over the country, record levels of murder. A 2020 in which 750 riots took place, 25 police officers killed, hundreds more killed, wounded, stores destroyed, cars burned, billions of dollars stolen. Very few people held to consequence, and the vice presidential candidate of the Democratic Party bailing them out. And all these things just keep happening, and we go through a created inflation recession because we cut off our energy independence. And instead of taking our natural gas and oil from the United States, we buy it from dictators. In fact, from Russia that uses that profit to kill Ukrainians. It all seems kind of strange, doesn't it? And all the questions about the 2020 election, and then the deliberate election of an incompetent president who doesn't seem to know who he is, what he's doing. Twice fell down walking upstairs, much less coming down. We'll give him a pass on the bicycle incident. We don't give him a pass, however, on giving away Bagram Air Base, which was a strategic defense against communism, wasn't it? 400 miles from China, you don't get an air base 400 miles from your biggest enemy. And if you're a patriot, you don't give it away. But I mean, I don't know how you could define him as a patriot. He seems to hate America. He calls us systemic racists. I don't know if he knows that means we're all racist, basically. We're all evil, basically. How he is able to deal with that in light of the fact that everybody in the world wants to come here. Whatever evil we are as a country in comparison to others, we must be pretty darn good because we are by far the number one choice as the best country to come to in the world, except the Democrats don't see that. They run us down constantly, particularly with this racism thing that was systemically racist. Now, when you see all these things and you hear all these things, it could sound like they're just different, unconnected complaints. You may agree with them. I doubt it. You may see them as a political theater. You may see them as a warped ideology. You may see them as stupidity. You may see them as corruption in order to, like the green program, in order to do away with gas, oil, and basically render us energy incompetent as well as energy dependent. A couple of years ago, I started rereading the history of communism, which I read in great detail in college. And all of a sudden, it started hitting me as I'm hearing these things. The one that hit me the most was the breakup of the nuclear family. Why would a group like Black Lives Matter want to break up the nuclear family with particular emphasis on getting rid of the father? So you combine two things with Black Lives Matter. They want to destroy the family and they want to destroy the police. That's why at every rally they say, pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. That's 700, 800 rallies. don't tell me they're not encouraging police killings. What does it mean? It means kill police. Why do we have an increase in the killing of police over the last 2 years since they emerged as a multi-million-dollar organization? But if you look at their manifesto that very few people do, much of which now has been hidden, but I have it, it could have been written by Karl Marx. Oh, no. It was written by Karl Marx because the woman who stole all the money, Patrice Cullors, tells us she's a very proud, trained Marxist. So why are we even in doubt this is a communist plan to take over America? Black Lives Matter makes that clear. And then we talk about critical race theory. What is critical race theory? Critical race theory, they say, is just a college thing. It's just college, academic. Well, it is academic. It was developed by Marx and mostly Engels, called critical theory. And the theory of it is that there's a critical conflict in society, like a fissure in the earth between what they call then the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the rich, powerful, and the poor. And the rich are mean, horrible, awful, terrible to a person, and you can do anything you want to them, and the poor are wonderful, terrific, and great, and the rich should give everything they have to the poor. And the poor should all have exactly the same amount of money, except for Patrice Cullors and Stalin and Putin and Xi and Hitler, who are the richest people in their country. In other words, it's a ideology, and the core of it is a mafia, right? But it's an ideology that surrounds a con game to make certain people very, very rich at the expense of others. Now, so that's been going on for 150 years or more. So you look at the things that were done to us over the last 20 to 30 years, they come right out of the communist playbook. In order to defeat them, you've got to see the connections. This would be a good time to take a short break. Free speech, religious liberty, Second Amendment. Across the country, our constitutional rights are under constant attack, and it's only getting worse by the day, which is why I am proud to support Patriot Mobile. They're not just America's only Christian conservative cell phone provider. They are one of the few companies fighting back. They offer the same nationwide coverage as the major carriers. So you get the same great service, plus the peace of mind that your money is combating the left's attempt to silence us. Patriot Mobile has plans to fit any budget, and their 100% US-based customer support team provides exceptional customer support. Patriot Mobile shares our values and supports organizations fighting for religious freedom, constitutional rights, the sanctity of life, and our veteran and first responders. Go to patriotmobile.com/Rudy or call 972-PATRIOT. Get free activation with the offer code RUDY. Veterans and first responders save even more, so make the switch today. Between the left, the media, and the rhinos, we need to fight back. patriotmobile.com/Rudy. patriotmobile.com/Rudy or call 972-PATRIOT.
You know, we talk about progressivism, liberalism, democratic socialism, this-ism, that-ism, and all these isms seem to lead to the same place. Progressivism, which really began in earnest with intellectuals about 120 years ago, late 1800s, early 1900s. They self-identify and give themselves these lovely names like progressive when they're not. And I looked at each one of these men at the time, top leading intellectuals, whether it was John Dewey or Crowley or Woodrow Wilson or whomever. And they all were very taken by Marx or taken by Marxism. And I realized some time ago, but I was able to really put it to paper, that these are basically the progeny of Marxism. This is the American application of Marxism, that they hate the limits in the Constitution. That's why they call it living and breathing. That's why they're constantly attacking it, starting with the Bill of Rights, which of course we embrace. Then I saw how they would attack the Declaration of Independence, which is basically a statement of embracing Western Enlightenment. That's what the Declaration of Independence is: natural law, Judeo-Christian morality, and so forth. They reject it all. And as I read deeper and studied more, I saw an individual like John Dewey, who destroyed our education system. He was so key at the time to this movement that he actually visited Moscow in 1928. You know, when Stalin was a known commodity, a killer, and so forth. And he admired their educational system because he said it didn't focus on individualism, it focused on unity and the community and the usual stuff. Not to get too deep in the weeds, Rousseau, Hegel, and then Marx, which is you have to surrender your individualism and your free will to the community, which really means the state. That also means mobility, private property rights, all these other things that are defended and fought for at the founding, defended in the Constitution, and are based on our principles. And I realized then that these people do not, this isn't just a debate on the fringes of the Constitution, this is a debate over fundamentals. And then I started researching things that came to be, I didn't expect it to: critical race theory, this transgender movement, so-called climate change. It turns out it's a degrowth movement that grew in the 70s out of Europe. All these different things. And then you hear Biden speak and the others speak. They always speak in class warfare, victim, victimizer, oppressed, oppressor. They use the language of Marx. And then if you mention Marx, say, what are you calling me, a Marxist? You know, that sort of thing. Now, it's a little different, Rudy, in this sense. They're not, you know, like the old Marxists, the old communists. They're not claiming allegiance to the Soviet Union or anything of that sort. The book's called American Marxism because these movements are clearly Marxist movements. BLM, they confess, they proudly celebrate the fact that the leaders are Marxists. The climate change movement, the Green New Deal, these members of the Democrats, members of the House, they're a cabal of Marxists, you know, AOC and so forth, in so many ways. So they're not about a 1 degree change in the temperature or something like that, as if we can affect it. They're about an attack on our capitalist system. Now, why? Because Marx particularly hated the American Industrial Revolution. Because the American Industrial Revolution under Marxism was supposed to show that the proletariat would rise up, the workers, and overthrow the bourgeoisie, the industrialists, the landlords. But what did it show? It showed the American people rose up, created a massive middle class that loves their country and will fight to support their country. So they demonstrate, and the Industrial Revolution demonstrates, that everything Marx stood for was wrong. These are fraud. So there's this constant attack on the American economic system, constant attempt to transfer wealth from the private sector to the government, constant use of the model language that Marx uses. And I said, look, we got to have the courage to call this what it is and stop pussyfooting around here because we're losing our country. So that's a long way to answer your question.
No, I think you did answer it. And the reality is we've come a long way that we can actually write about this and talk about it. And, you know, sometimes I find myself when I'm on radio or giving a speech or answering a question, talking about the fact that this is basically a communist type revolution, that they want to completely change our form of government. This isn't the old liberal conservative debate. They want to tax more, we want to tax less. They want a little more government, we want less government. We're tougher on military, they're weaker. This is, we don't want a Bill of Rights. You can't have a gun. We're going to take away the Second Amendment. We're going to keep all the guns and you're going to have none. Honestly, they really don't want us to believe in God. And they'd rather us not be a family because then the state can control the child. And when you look at all the things that are happening in schools, we haven't quite gotten to the state taking over the child, but now children can be vaccinated without their parents' consent. They can be given condoms without their parents' consent. Who knows? Pretty soon they'll be able to change their gender without their parents' consent. Because the theory is the parent doesn't really know, the state knows. So Now I think enough of that has been obvious to the American people. We actually can have this discussion without sounding like we're crazy old McCarthy nuts who see communists everywhere. And that's why the book is so valuable. It makes a connection, and all of a sudden something like climate change, which you would never think of, is connected to Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter, I think, has helped us in the sense that they've been so honest. They're the one organization that is not afraid to say, Patrice Cullors very proudly said, I'm not just a Marxist, I'm a very well-trained Marxist. And then when you look at her program, it's take the child away at 2 years old. You don't really need husbands. They're kind of an appendage that just suppresses, religion suppresses. And you read it and you realize this organization that kind of captured these shootings to get attention has nothing to do with it. It has to do with gender, and it has to do with politics. It has nothing to do with Black lives. But they're getting pretty darn far. On education, they've almost accomplished most of their goals. And on media, they must control 70 to 80% of the media. The censorship over the last year and a half, Mark, I've never seen that before here. And I think it may be worse than in some communist countries. I know you said we have fewer rights now than we had on the George III. And a lot of people criticize that. Isn't that correct? Did you say that? I said almost the same thing. I believe, in terms of censorship, there may be some dictatorships where people have a few more rights than we do.
Rudy, I said that, and of course, the usual
I love it when you do that. That's the same stuff Rush used to do.
I poke them in the eye. They don't like it. This American Marxist movement, they don't want to be questioned. They don't want to be challenged. So when you say something like I did last week, and I said, we have less liberty today than we did prior to the revolution, they bring up slavery and indigenous peoples. This is how stupid they are. I'm talking about the attack on the civil society. The civil society. I'm talking about the attack on Western civilization. And that is, when you have the attack that you have now on free speech, when it was understood back then that it was a moral right, and when you have an attack on representative government, that most of the laws being passed in this country aren't passed by our representatives, and when you have an attack on the nature of the citizenry with an open border intentionally by one party, and we know that because they don't let the Cubans in, but everybody else can come in, depending on what they think they will register one day. And down the list, one after another, after another, after another, I say this. We're not really a representative republic anymore. They pass omnibus bills. We don't even know what it's in it. We don't even know what to say to our congressmen or senators when we call them. We're not really a federal republic anymore. You can see the attack on the states. And we're not really a constitutional republic anymore, because you can see with a simple majority in the House of 4 or 5 and no majority in the Senate, where the vice president breaks the tie that they believe they can fundamentally alter the constitutional system. I don't think the framers of the Constitution would think we have much of a system left. Now the American Marxists, they use the Constitution to try and destroy the Constitution. And they use liberty to try and destroy liberty. And they'll do whatever they have to do to advance their cause. They'll use Alinsky, like the vicious assaults on you and me and others. They'll use Cloud and Piven. You see the overwhelming of the system on the southern border, the breaking of the system, and then blaming the victims, the American people, for the system. You can see they use these communist ideals, these various tenured or living and dead professors, their ideologies. This is the stuff that is taught day in and day out in our universities and colleges, and now is leached into our public schools and even into elementary schools. And you can see them putting it to work. It's that simple. They are. There's no question about it.
And one of the core assets that communism, Marxism, socialism has, they have no morality. Morality is irrelevant because morality is do whatever is necessary for the predominance of the state, including cheating, lying, stealing, and even in certain cases, killing. So there's no Ten Commandments, there's no moral base. You can justify everything as helping the state. You and I, and particularly me, I grew up during the Cold War. So when I first went into the Justice Department, we were developing the FISA court. And I spent my first 2 years doing FISA warrants, but for communist spies. And that's almost like doesn't exist anymore. But I remember that. And about 2 years ago, watching what you're watching, it all started coming back to me. Like I'm seeing the same things I used to read about and had forgotten about. And this next 2 elections, then, that's really the critical point, isn't it? Where we're going to go in this direction or we're going to make a complete reversal. I think they're more critical than any in history.
Well, what's frightening, Rudy, is that if the Democrats had 51 or 52 members in the Senate, we couldn't stop them. And so it's unrealistic to believe that we can win every subsequent election, because we're not. So this is a very slippery glide path that we're on. And there's things that need to be done to fight this and to fight these various institutions that have developed over time, that have networked over time. Because if the American people in the end don't want their liberty, there's not going to be liberty. If the American people in the end keep voting for tyrants, then we're going to have tyrants. If the American people in the end don't rise up against institutionalized corruption and criminality, which I think exists throughout Washington and so forth, then we're going to get more of it. So the point of this book, it's the longest book I've ever written, but it's got the fewest chapters, is the first 6 chapters is about informing. I don't mean at a surface level. I mean going deep into what's going on in this country in these various areas. And then the last chapter is an attempt to galvanize and rally people who love this country. I don't care what party, I don't care what race, I don't care about any of that. If you love the country, that distinguishes you from these American Marxists. If you love the country, if you love freedom, if you love a constitutional, honest rule of law, then you need to join us. And we need to take on every one of these institutions, whether it's corporations, whether it's teacher unions, whether it's colleges and universities and how they tenure professors, whether it's what's going on the border and so forth. Because if we don't stand up like past generations have, and even though this is in many ways more daunting and complicated because it's internal, it's not, a foreign enemy with respect to this, then we're going to lose, because we're losing now.
The American liberal that we grew up with, or that I grew up with, and you grew up with also, they were still there. If there was still such a person left, would be one of our strongest allies. Even though they might disagree with us on a whole other area of our philosophy, that would not be nearly as important as our right to free speech. And the classic liberal
Uh, it is the ends justifies the means, the old communist statement and motto, and that's what it is. Walter DuRan, who worked for the New York Times and was a mouthpiece for Stalin in the 20s and 30s. And he was their bureau chief in Moscow. He was the one who once said of Stalin, well, he has to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Well, he broke more than a few eggs. And the same New York Times, if I may, even though it's sort of a side point, they knew he was corrupt. They knew he was on Stalin's payroll. And Stalin gave him girlfriends and food and all the rest. And then shortly thereafter, the same New York Times, whose bureau chief was sympathetic in Berlin to the Third Reich, and they covered up the Holocaust for most of the Holocaust up until 1944, even though the paper was owned by a Jewish family. The same New York Times in 1959, through Herbert Matthews, who breathed life into Castro's guerrilla campaign and helped support his effort. That's the New York Times that supported, in essence, Stalin, Hitler, and Castro. And I've invited them to come on my program and debate me every step of the way. So think about this, to make a long story or to circle back. Why the hell would they care about due process? I mean, they have backed some of the most heinous, genocidal nut jobs the world has ever produced, either through censorship or affirmative reporting.
Think your homeowner's insurance covers home title fraud? Think again. And neither does your common identity theft program. The FBI calls home title fraud one of the fastest growing crimes, which is why you need to go to HomeTitleLock.com, America's leader in home title protection. Here's the problem. The deed to your home is the only document that proves you own it. And the deeds to all of our homes now are online. In minutes, a criminal can find and forge your name off the deed to your home and refile as the new owner. Like Jeff, who spent a fortune in legal fees after a thief forged himself onto the deed to Jeff's home and took out loans. Jeff didn't have home title lock then. He does now. Or Deborah, who thought our common identity theft service would protect her. Then a criminal got onto the deed to a home and had her evicted. Deborah has home title lock now. HomeTitleLock.com is your peace of mind, and the deed to your home is protected. Visit HomeTitleLock.com. HomeTitleLock.com. Welcome back to Rudy's Common Sense, and that gave you I think a pretty good analysis. There's a lot more to be done about that, but that gave you a pretty good analysis of how they have infiltrated our education, our schools. The main purpose is to take our children away from us and make them little communists. I mean, if you look at the literature of Black Lives Matter, their real goal, get rid of the father for sure. Fathers are seen as extremely devastating and useless. And mothers only just a little bit more so until 2 years. The goal really is to get them into the state schools by 2 so they can be taught to be little communists, little Hitlers, little whatever it is. I mean, all dictatorships had a similar idea, and it really does go back to Marx, which is get control of the minds of those kids, get God out of it, get parents out of it, get the father out first, and then ease the mother out on the theory that she'll be liberated. Now she doesn't have to worry about her kids. She can work all day and be a slave for them. That's what it means to destroy the nuclear family. It's a completely communist idea, and it's now spreading all over America through Black Lives Matter and left-wing organizations and the teachers union, and similar to the way they're teaching critical race theory, which after all is Marx, as we've shown, with race put in the middle. You have critical race theory, critical theory, rich, poor, critical race theory, divide us along race. But divide us and conquer. That's the point. The other thing we'll look at briefly, so that we can get a sense of this, so we can go into it in more detail, it's what's being done in the area of law enforcement. I I mean, basically, the whole focus of going after children is part of even a bigger picture of destroying the morality of a country. So that's why you would bring in, you do absurd things like bringing in drag queens for 5-year-olds to teach 5-year-olds. Basically, anything goes, whatever you want to do, be a drug addict, legalize drugs, legalize prostitution, legalize, I don't know, probably a lot of other things that they have in mind. It's to destroy the morality of the country so it's ripe for the taking. And one of the ways you do that is to create a destroyed law enforcement or a vast amount of crime. And that is what George Soros has been investing in for now 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I think 40 million. I know this was a rather brief look at a very, very complex subject, but I tried to make it brief, and I tried to make it a little easier so you start going to the connections. When you see these things, you don't say, oh, here's another one, and why did this happen, and why did that happen? It's all written down. I mean, you can go to Marx, you could go to Engels, you could go to Trotsky. I'd really like to get your thoughts about this. So get back to me on rudygiulianics.com. I'd like to get your thoughts on this, what we've reviewed today, and then some of the other areas where maybe you see connections that we don't. Again, on rudygiulianics.com. Subscribe and communicate. And together, we'll save our way of life. God bless America.